It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Peter Williams, and we're going to be discussing the Greek English New Testament Tyndale House Cambridge edition and English Standard Version. That was a mouthful. That was a mouthful, but we got to fit that all in because that's what we're talking about today. And that's published by our friends over at Crossway. Peter, it is truly an honor, sir. Welcome back to the show.
Great to be with you.
Well, Peter, I never assume that people are going to know even what Tyndale House is here in the States. A lot of times if I talk to somebody who's in the Christian publishing industry about Tyndale House, they go, oh, you mean that publisher here in Illinois? And that's not actually where you're based at. So tell us what Tyndale House is across the pond, the mission you guys are on there, and the important work you do.
Yeah, and thanks for asking. So Tyndale House in Cambridge, I think it's the first thing to be called Tyndale House, began in 1944 and is a Bible research center. And it's the biggest collection of positive Bible geeks in the world. We've got a great world-leading library, and people come and research the Bible at a pretty deep level. And when we don't have a pandemic going on, then we have 50 or more people working at the doctoral level or above every day researching the Bible.
And as far as your role there, before we got into the interview, Peter, we were talking about how you had switched titles last time we talked, but give us a little bit of your history there and some of the work you've done.
Yeah, so I'm the principal, which means I have the privilege of leading the organization as I have done for 13 years. And I'm leading it as a researcher and trying to instill a research culture here. Also liking to get out and speak to people about the wonders of God's word. And we have a number of initiatives. We like to communicate about the Bible. We've got a free magazine about the Bible written by scholars, but actually gone over by communication specialists, who actually speaks to ordinary people. And we have a website, tyndalehouse.com, where there are resources and videos and so on. And we also like to bring in scholars from countries that are not well served with resources and help them get equipped to be thought leaders in their context.
Well, and having had many Bible geek friends through the years, I've seen, on social media and other posts, a lot of enthusiasm and excitement when they get to come hang out with you guys for a semester or a season. It's a place that is loved to be visited by all of us Bible nerds. For the sake of kind of the Bible nerd, Bible geek friends, I'll run down the particulars of this volume because I know people are always asking those sorts of things, at least in my circles. So this volume features the full text of the Greek New Testament produced at Tyndale House, along with the ESV text. It's got a textual apparatus, high-quality book paper, Smithsonian binding, a single-column format, and it is in a hardcover edition. And this particular version comes with a slipcase as well, which I always appreciate. I keep those slipcases so the binding stays nice and tight on the shelf there. So always something to hold on to there. In terms of this particular Greek New Testament project, somebody from the outside might go, well, gosh, we've got plenty of Greek New Testaments. Why would we go down the path of doing a project like this? So how did this journey get started?
Well, I think you start with the fact that the Word of God is really important, and therefore you want to study it in its original, and you want that original to be as accurate as possible. And a burden came on my heart and Dirk Jonkin, who really led the project, Dr. Dirk Jonkin's heart 15 or more years ago, to try and make a Greek New Testament which was as accurate as it possibly could be. Now, there are some very good ones out there already. So we were setting the standard high. We wanted to make improvements. And over the years, we worked at that, and we studied lots of manuscripts and brought together this text. And I guess it means typesetting about 1 million characters when you put all the accents and letters in. And what we've sought to do is, as much as possible, to lean on well-written manuscripts. And I think there have been, it's not that changes things a lot, because the ESV, for instance, which is now set parallel with our Greek New Testament, was made from a different basis, not from our Greek New Testament. But it's not that different. But it's saying this really matters, an act of worship to God, an act of service to the church. We want to have it as well as it can be, even if that means thinking an awful lot about geeky things like spelling and paragraphs and those sort of things. We got quite into those.
And in terms of your role in the project, Peter, how did you get to contribute?
Yeah, so I was the institution leader as it was going on, and also the research assistant to Dirk Jonkin as he led the project, which worked really well. I mean, we're also good friends. So I was over him in employment terms and under him in project terms. And what that enabled me is to actually be able to work on some of the detail of the project, which I think is very important if you're leading a research institution, and yet not having to think of the driving forward of the project at the same time in quite the same way as if I were doing it myself. So it worked very well. And then we brought in other people, research associates and assistants, to do particular work on particular. Sometimes it was a particular word. How should we spell this word if there's a bit of variation in the manuscripts?
And in terms of this Greek New Testament, how does it differ from the Nestle Aland or the UBS text? I feel like for a lot of us, those are the texts we had available when we were learning Greek and starting out.
Yeah, so the United Bible Society's burgundy text and the Nestle Aland blue covered text, as they generally are, I mean, they're very good. What we would say is there are certain things we've done that they haven't. For instance, I would say our paragraphs, they may not be the right paragraphs, but at least they are based on manuscripts. That's not something they sought to do. They have quite a complex page, which gives you a lot of information. So, for instance, you might be halfway through a speech and it will put some words in italics because it will say they're quotations from the Old Testament. And they probably are quotations from the Old Testament. The problem about marking that is you actually already make the readers read it a particular way. And I think sometimes we can be referring to things and we're not necessarily that conscious that we're referring to them, or that our readers aren't that conscious. And so we've gone for the plainest text we possibly can. The only things we have interrupting the Greek and its punctuation are actually the verse numbers. And so people have found that sometimes what they want to do is they want to read from our text in the morning when they want their devotional and they just want to read it in a really plain way. And then if they're teaching the use of the Old Testament in the New, they might want to start with an Nestle Aland text because that will show them quotations. But then there's a particular thing that happens often in manuscripts before things that the Nestle Aland text says are quotations. And this is the geeky bit. Is the way the final accent goes. Very often, an accent can flip. It can be either grave or acute on the last syllable of a word. And what we find is that in the Nestle Aland text, often it will be an acute accent and saying, this is like an end and there's a pause, and then you go on to the quotation. And what we're finding often in the manuscripts is there's a grave accent, which suggests it really is just running straight on. So there's a slightly different rhythm that we will have to some of those things. And I think that's important. And I think it's also good for there to be a bit of competition in the field. So there are just lots of things that are better about their edition in terms of they've got appendices that give you lots of information. That's really good. I would say there are things that are better about ours in terms of some of the things that I've just seen about paragraphs are incredible, really. In terms of the way you think of a passage being divided. I was stunned when I found that Jesus' parable in Mark chapter 4, verse 3 begins, behold, then a new paragraph. He says, listen, then a new paragraph, behold, the sower went out to sow. And the really striking thing there is that he starts firstly with the listening bit, and then the mind's imagination is to imagine the sower going out. Then that paragraph ends with the word listen. And so that's an interesting sort of thing that's going on. And we're working towards a second edition. And so we're really thinking about how we do that. So we might want to make some changes. So one change, I'm working a lot on the parable of the prodigal son at the moment, is we've got that in several paragraphs, and that's based on early manuscripts. But the very earliest, called Papyrus 75, has the whole parable in one paragraph. And it struck me that's really powerful because, of course, if Jesus is telling this story, then it doesn't have any paragraphs. Now, it's not that you can't have paragraphs in Jesus' speech. Sermon on the Mount, it's broken into sections. But actually, when you're talking about a story, it just flows through. And so for me, even seeing as you sometimes get in the New Testament, the splicing between very short paragraphs and then a really long one, we like to even them all out, spread them out. It can be really quite striking. John chapter 3 would be another case. Where does Jesus' speech to Nicodemus end? Does Jesus say the John 3:16 bit or not? And what we find is our paragraph just runs all the way from his reply to Nicodemus in chapter 3, verse 10, right the way to 3, verse 21. And that's got good early manuscript support. That's suggesting, by the way, that Jesus said the whole lot. So if you've got a red letter Bible, the whole lot should be in red, although you probably shouldn't have red letter Bibles aren't ideal. But anyway, they've got their advantages, but they've got disadvantages too. And so just in terms of seeing that's quite striking. So new paragraph every time there's an exchange between Nicodemus and Jesus. But then when he gets into his flow, just one long block.
And you've mentioned manuscripts several times. In terms of new manuscripts, things being documented, discovered, available, how has that shifted in the past 50 years? Because I realize that's a lot of the reason we end up updating these various New Testaments, year after year. So in terms of manuscripts available, how has that shifted in the past few decades?
Well, I think that the 19th century wins out for the really big discoveries. Discovering Codex Sinaiticus, the earliest complete copy of the entire New Testament. Wow, 4th century, that's amazing. And although Codex Vaticanus was known before then, it wasn't widely circulated and published, so that was big, and there were other ones discovered then. Early 20th century, people discover some quite substantial papyri, and since then it's tended to be more scraps, shorter things, and there are boxes of these in Oxford where people are still working through those, and so shorter bits are coming to light, and some of those can be quite early, 2nd or 3rd century, which I feel are a bit like an auditor checking the accounts of a company. You don't have to check every single thing to check whether there's fraud going on, and you don't have to have an early bit from the 2nd century of every bit of the New Testament to be able to check up on the later manuscripts. Just each time you check and there is something, it matches, you say, yeah, this looks like it's well handed down. Now, what's happening probably in this stage more is that manuscripts are coming to light. Sometimes they are manuscripts we used to know about and have forgotten about. Sometimes they're in monasteries and libraries. There's even a tendency now to find them in the underwriting of old manuscripts. So between about the 6th and the 9th centuries, people were desperately short of writing material. Paper hasn't been invented in the West. Papyrus has basically gone extinct. So what do you do every time you write anything? You want to use leather. So what you do is you rub out old writing and you write on top of it. And so people did this for a few centuries. And right now, with multispectral imaging and then special statistical techniques to read that, you can actually recover writing that was erased 1,300 years ago. And so that's a new way in which things are coming to light. And I would say there's quite a bit still to be discovered just in libraries. Just go to old libraries in Europe and the Middle East and so on, and you can find stuff.
I want to make sure we talk about the concise textual apparatus. For the person who doesn't know what that is, be sure to explain that and tell us, in terms of your apparatus, what's the benefits of that with this text?
Yeah, so just at the bottom of the page, we have what we think are the really important differences between manuscripts. And we don't try and overcomplicate them. Sometimes people will put in differences that really are neither here nor there in terms of meaning. But for instance, if you want to have a look at a question like in Mark 9, verse 29, does Jesus say that a certain sort of demon only comes out by prayer or by prayer and fasting? And we felt that's a pretty significant one. So down at the bottom of our page, we'll explain. ESV goes for prayer. We go for prayer and fasting. There's a bit of a contrast there. We're not certain about it. But there is some good manuscript support for actually having and fasting in as well. And obviously, it may not be explaining a rule, but it's still worthwhile knowing what's likely to be earliest.
And one of the things I think that's shifted from even when I was back in Bible college 20 some years ago, I feel like the focus on original language has diminished somewhat. So even though we're at a time when we have lots of English translations available, why is it critical for us to continue pursuing Bible study in the original languages, both Greek, Hebrew, even
Yeah,
sometimes a little Aramaic, just for good measure?
and I would say to that, the different ways we were talking. I say, well, why would we even bother grinding our coffee fresh? Um, I mean, won't just coffee that's been in the fridge for a few weeks be fine? And does it really have to be done at that particular temperature and so on? But actually, people have got really geeky. Not everyone's a coffee geek. People can be geeky about other things because they said it really matters. We want the finest. Well, hey, do we want just something that's adequate and it's okay? Or do we want to say, no, we want the best? And I think we should, as Christians, want to be Bible connoisseurs and have a Bible connoisseur culture, because we need to be obsessed by the question, what does God say to us? Not as an intellectual question, as an existential question. How should I live? Because the most important thing on the planet is, what is God? What is my maker and owner and father saying to me? There's nothing more important than that. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Well, hang on. We need to be obsessed by that. What is every word? So actually, when there is growth in the church and growth in love for God, there should be growth in love for the precise detail of God's word. Now, of course, we know people can be into the precise detail and not love God. Jesus criticized scribes and Pharisees often for reading scriptures and missing the main thing. That's perfectly possible. Plenty of Bible scholars don't love God. But still, if you love God, you need to be passionate about the detail of his word.
Well, I think that coffee connection will definitely connect with a lot of my Bible loving readers. There seems to be a correlation with coffee loving and book loving, at least in my experience. For somebody who's never used an edition like this that has the Greek text on one side, the English text on the other, why can this be a benefit or a help? I know early on when I was learning Greek, they're like, all right, put away your English Bible, only spend time in your Greek text. But in terms of ongoing use, you mentioned that this might be helpful in a devotional sense, but benefit of having these two in the same book side by side.
Yeah, so I think there can be a nice benefit in the contrast. So I just look at a page here and the differences in paragraphs. You can think, oh, why is it this way? Why is it that way? That can be useful. But I'd also say it's just good to get reading the thing. And sometimes people can be put off learning a little Greek because they think I will never be perfect at it. And I think I would say it's a bit like being put off cooking because you'll never be cordon bleu chef. Don't, have a try. And people can say, well, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Yes, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing if you're surrounded by lots of people with loads of knowledge and you go spouting off, or with no knowledge and you go spouting off. But actually, if you're in a culture where a lot of people have got quite a bit of knowledge, then that won't work. So if I go and start spouting off about viruses now, I mean, everyone feels they know a bit. I'm not going to get very far because it's going to be obvious that I'm not a good authority on the subject. So I think if we have a church Christian culture where people raise their game, then that won't be a problem. And you can just start with your very first word of the New Testament, which is, guess what, the word biblos, which sounds rather like Bible. And you say, wow, you just got to work through 6 letters in order to see that. And guess what? The first one really does look like a B and the next one looks like an I. So just get in there, see how far you get. Don't get put off. It's like not doing sport because you're not going to be an Olympic athlete. Why would you set such an unreasonable bar? So yes, some people have the privilege of giving their lives to writing a Greek grammar, becoming an expert in Greek. You don't have to do that. You just have to start taking an interest. Like you start taking an interest in your coffee, start taking an interest in this.
Well, and one of the things I'll say too, in terms of printed volumes, at a time where we've got amazing electronic resources available, what I really appreciate about this sort of a volume is I can use it offline. It forces me to really slow down. I love the experiential nature that I get to hold the book and feel it. And, devotionally, I feel like it elicits a bit of a different experience. But also it just the whole experiential part. I love electronic resources like lots of the
Mhm.
other geeky
Yep.
friends I have. We're big fans of Logos and Accordance, but still, there's something with printed text and in a book that is just gives you a totally different experience. Peter, anything I haven't asked you yet that you want to make sure we fit into the interview?
No, that sounds really good.
All right. And for the folks who'd like to connect with you, find out more about the work you do at Tyndale House, where can we discover you on the web?
Yeah, so tyndalehouse.com, tyndalehouse.com. You can find about our magazine there, sign up for our newsletter, and find out what's going on in the latest Bible and geeky research.
And like I do with every episode, I'll have detailed links in the show notes. I'll connect to Peter's and my previous interviews and have places where you can pick up this volume as well. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Peter Williams. Once again, our resource today was the Greek English New Testament Tyndale House Cambridge Edition and English Standard Version. Again, if you want to find out more about Tyndale House, head over to tyndalehouse.com. For more on this New Testament volume, another place you can go is crossway.org. And Peter, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been a joy. It's always an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you.